Welcome to The Business Strategist, the show for CEOs and founders ready to scale fast, lead smarter, and build a business that doesn't rely on them. I'm Adam Strong, award-winning strategist, former elite athlete, international speaker, and 3 times best-selling author. After 3 decades in business, I know exactly what it takes to grow, scale, and exit with impact. Each week, I dive into real conversations with industry experts, bold entrepreneurs, and clients navigating the uphill struggles of business, giving you the tools and the strategies to create more profit, more freedom, and more impact. Let's get into it. Hey guys, Adam Strong here, host of The Business Strategist. First of all, I wanted to welcome some of our listeners here on the show. If you're new to the show and you're enjoying some of our episodes, please make sure that you hit that follow and subscribe button on whatever channel that you're listening to today. I want to also welcome back some of our followers and subscribers. Thank you very much for your support. We really greatly appreciate it. Now, I would really love it if I could have some more feedback from you guys. So if you could leave either a 1 or a 5-star review over on Apple or Spotify, I would love to hear from you guys, because without the show, we don't know how to improve, right? So do me a favor, go over there and head over and leave a review for me. Or alternatively, feel free to head over to YouTube, over onto the channel, and feel free to leave a comment on our YouTube channel. Anyway, hope you're rocking and rolling. Enjoy today's episode. Cheers now. What if you could crush the 90% failure odds and turn your startup into a legacy? Meet Gregory Shepard, who is a multi-neurodivergent founder and serial entrepreneur who has built and sold over 12 companies, including a $925 million landmark deal. Gregory is a published author of Penguin Random House with a book called The Startup Life Cycle. He's a serial entrepreneur and has won 4 private equity awards and is a TEDx speaker. Now, I've had a lot of great conversations with Gregory offline, and it's just really rich conversations and really refreshing, actually. Some of the things that I'm going to be talking to Gregory about is a lot about some of the psychological shifts more than anything else that he experienced. But we're also going to be talking a little bit about the 7-step process that he's got in his book and how he's come to that. But we're also going to be kind of moving into some of the reasons why you guys may make some of the common mistakes when it comes to startups, scaling up, exiting, that kind of stuff. And so Gregory's got a wealth of experience that we're going to dive into. So without further ado, Gregory, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really do appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to today. And how's it going so far?
It's going fantastic. Today is a really good, you have those days that are like really great days. Yesterday, I had one of those days where I felt like I got beat up all day. And then this morning, I had some really good news. And today, I feel like everything's going my way.
I guess it also depends on perspective, right? You can either wake up with, and you're going to be, I'm going to have a great day. Or you wake up and you kind of feel already beaten before it's even turned 9 a.m. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's a mindset, I believe, more than anything else. But I do get the whole kind of like we have good days and bad days because we are only human after all.
Yeah. Every day when I wake up, I get on the end of my bed, I sit there and I say, today is going to be a fantastic day. Expect really good things to happen, unexpected good things to happen. I do that every morning.
Yep. Love it. Love it. Some good stuff. Well, let's jump in because I'm really interested to learn more about not just your experience, but I mean, listen, you've started up 12 companies, you've exited 12 companies. That is some achievement. I'm always fascinated because, I mean, most people don't even exit their business once, let alone 12 times. I mean, when you reflect back on that, how do you feel about that, first of all?
I mean, it's really interesting. When I first started, I was like 19, when I built my first company, and the internet wasn't out, right? So you had to choose. Startups were way harder back then. There wasn't a lot of venture capital. It wasn't like the whole thing didn't really exist. The whole startup scene didn't exist. So in the beginning, on one side, it was easier, right? Because the competitors don't know about you, you don't know about them, and you're kind of in your own little silo. Right. And you think you're succeeding because you can't see what's around you. And then later on, you start being more cognizant of what's around you, and you can see, one of your competitors passing you up or some new competitor coming on the map. I think that when I look back on it, a lot of it is just persistent consistency, just being constantly, relentlessly focused on achieving whatever you need to achieve that day. And to a certain extent, not looking that far into the future when I first started.
When you first started up, like when was that? Was that like in the 70s? Was that in the 80s?
It was in the early 80s. Yeah, I started in the 80s. And my first non-official business, I don't usually say this, but it was a bungee jumping company. And I lost all my money. It was a disaster. And then after that, I did a lender, so a non-depository bank, and then applied environmental biotechnology. And then the internet came out, and then it was all just tech startups.
Wow. So hang on a second. When you first started up, it was like leisure activities, which was a bit of a flop. But then you kind of transitioned into, I mean, how many different industries did you decide, oh, I'm going to go hop, pop, 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 and then you found the industry for you that was kind of more your thing? Like, how many failures did you have to make that discovery?
It's interesting because I think that failure is part of progress. I think it's just another word for progress. I only had one that was like a full failure. That was the bungee jumping company where it just complete failure. The bank I sold and then the biotech company I sold to a publicly traded company. In the beginning, I just sort of stumbled in stuff, right? I was working as a loan officer for a bank in LA, in a really bad area of LA, because nobody wanted to work there. And I was young and they wouldn't hire anybody for it. So I said, I'll do it. I'll do it. So I took it, and then I learned the ropes on how this whole lending thing worked out. And then I immediately was like, oh, I could set up my own. And then I got a line of credit from them, and then I set up my own, and then I sold that. While I was doing that, I had a friend of mine who was studying at university on the application of bacteria to hydrocarbons. And he was studying this guy named Dr. Howard Warren, who had invented a way to move bacteria. So bacteria eats up hydrocarbons, right? So oils, greases, fats, anything that's a hydrocarbon. And it naturally does that. The problem is that there weren't enough. We produce more than they can handle. So you just put more of them in. But the obstacle there is that they are in water. And so now you're having to transfer these really heavy buckets of water. This guy figured out if you throw wheat germ in there, they jump on the wheat germ and then you freeze dry them. And now these things are super light. And so when I found out about that, I called the guy and I was like, hey, I just sold the business. I'm really interested in what you're doing. And that's how I got into applied environmental biotechnology.
Wow. That's quite a story. Love that. Love that. Love that. Well, listen, let's start, because you've been an entrepreneur for what, best part of 40 years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Easy. It's kind of like it's like half your life of being more than half your life being an entrepreneur. But what would you like, from your perspective, like just for our listeners, how did you overcome the common mistakes that most startups often tend to fail from? Like what were the mistakes that you were trying to avoid that you still see in startup space?
I think that back then, when I first started, I made lots of mistakes, and they could have been fatal. But what I did is I was able to think on my heels and figure out what I did, reverse engineer what I did, and then I would ask myself, what would I have done with the knowledge I have now differently? And then I would go back to where I made the decision that caused me to go wrong. And then I would implement that new thing that I would have done had I known everything I known from the failure. And that's literally how I did it before I did all the research and understood what the actual reasons were. It was just sort of applying that thought process to all the mistakes I had made along the way. Because there's no way you could prevent making mistakes. Mistakes are part of the process. So I would literally sit there and I would go, okay, everything is upside down. When did this happen? What fork in the road? What decision did I make that turned this upside down? Okay, now I know that. So that was my first data point. And then I would say, if I knew everything I know now, what decision would I have made at that point? And then I would go all the way back to that point and go back in time and reverse my business to that decision point, and then apply what I had known. And then, it was going back and forth. Like, you go 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, relentlessly, and eventually, I started to learn about mistakes that I would have made had I not thought clearly about the decision I was going to make in the first place.
Did you ever kind of journal, or like, how did you gather your thoughts, and like, how did you react that emotionally?
This is going to be, you're going to think this is really funny. I had a whiteboard and I used sticky notes, and I had a whiteboard with a line that had a journey. So imagine that you're drawing a line, and then whenever I had a critical decision, I would draw a line up or down that would say, this is a critical decision. And I would put sticky notes on what happened. And then if something went wrong, I would go back to that why, where everything split off, and I would circle it. And then I would say, okay. And then I would say, what did I decide? What do I know now? What would I have done differently? Let's go back and do that differently. So I literally had like a whiteboard with a line and then sticky notes along the way, journaling visually journaling all the decisions I had made, any critical decision, any bigger decision. I put that in there. That's how I did it.
Oh, I love that. So basically you had on the whiteboard, like, it would be, say, what, a scenario or a decision that you needed to make. What would be on the sticky note? Like, give me an example.
It would be like, decided to change my ideal customer to this customer. And then I would have a description of that customer. And then that one may split off again and say, oh, the customer I had was the wrong customer, so I went after this customer. And then maybe it split off again. And then I would go back to the origination of that entire, process, right? Because every time you make a decision, you split off. It's like driving down a freeway or a highway or whatever, and then getting off, you're choosing to go that direction. So I would basically jump backwards on the highway and then decide, I don't want to get off on that exit. I want to get off on a different exit.
What you're saying is the way that you learned best was basically to get it out of your head and write it down, right?
Yeah. 100%.
I mean,
yeah.
That to me is that to me is a golden nugget in itself. Like, that's such a great technique, because I feel like, and I'm sure you've experienced this, where you've been up like till 2-4 in the morning, worried or fearful about a decision that you may have made, and you're worried about the consequences. Does that make sense?
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Right. So did that help you with kind of helping you to sleep better at night?
Totally. Yeah, it totally did. Because the thing that I think in interviewing all these entrepreneurs, and even in my own experience, that causes everybody a lot of anxiety is the unknown, right? Like, you don't know something, and then your mind races with what are all the things that could go wrong. So my mom told me one time, and she's the one that gave me this thought. She said, man, if I knew what I know now, and I decided, well, why couldn't you go backwards knowing what you know now? And why couldn't you reboot the area wherever you made a bad decision? And then that's what I started applying. And I started tracking it on a whiteboard, with literally like a line with sticky notes, along the journey of the line. And then all these like little offshoots of decisions I made. And I would go back to the point when everything went wrong. And then I would start over with what I knew now, and it was really it worked really well. It helped me for many, many.
Out of all the startups that you did, what was it that what was the one startup that maybe you had this kind of realization that you kind of been doing shit wrong for like many years, and you were like, why did I not see this like 10 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever have any of those realizations?
Oh my God, yes.
Give us an example. What was the biggest one?
I think the one that was like pivotal in my sort of like, I had an epiphany and I was like, oh my God, I need to do things differently. So this was like the dot bomb. Do you remember when the dot bomb happened and the whole internet, we called it the dot com in the late 90s. We called it the dot bomb here. And so I was building a company and that happened. And I had to lay off a lot of people, like 65 people.
Wow.
And I had asked myself, I was like, man, what could I have done differently that I did? What would I have done differently if I had gone back in time and I had known that this was coming? And I thought to myself, that is something that everybody should be aware of, right? So when COVID happened, I was prepared for it because I had thought to myself, you never know when something is going to happen. right? Like nobody would have expected that this crazy, ridiculous, awful president that we have would have possibly been elected. But and then you see the tariffs, and there's a lot of turbulence because of this, right? And that causes a lot of problem. But if you sort of say to yourself, I'm safe, like I've built my company bomb shelter proof, and if something happens, I'm going to be able to get through a good year, 2 years of hardship, then you're ready for that. When that happened during that in the 90s, I sat back and I was like, okay, how could I have survived this better? I ended up having to sell that company early. It was called
Mm-hmm.
Affiliate Announcement. And I had to sell it actually earlier than I had planned on originally because I needed the money to keep another business, another startup alive. Because I usually would do one or two at the same time, sometimes three at the same time. And
Wow.
so I had to sell this one to keep the other one alive, and I had to sell it early. And it was a real sting because this thing was tracking to be a really good company. And to fund the other one that was a better company, which is the one that ultimately ended up going to eBay Enterprise Marketing Solutions, that was the big one. So it's good that I kept it alive. But during that time frame, I remember sitting there going, man, if I had known that this was going to come, what would I have done differently? Well, I would have not been in such a growth spurt, right? I would have been more cautious about my growth. And instead of getting too excited and too sort of ambitious and optimistic about, all of the possible amazing positive outcomes, and instead started thinking about, well, what could go wrong? If something went wrong, what could go wrong? And everybody saw the bubble during that era happening, right? And I saw it too. I remember seeing it, and I remember thinking, oh, this is about to tumble, but I didn't think it was going to affect me. But
Mm.
now when I see these sort of things, I think, hey, these things affect everybody, regardless of where you are in your startup, what stage you're at. It just trickles down. Like this insanity that our president is doing with the tariffs, it's affecting everybody, right? It's affecting everybody around the world, right? It's insanity. But anyway, if if you're ready for these unknown knowns and the unknown unknowns happening, then you can secure a place in your business where you can fight through that stuff, right? You can survive through those circumstances. Like, when you're on a cruise ship and you learn how to put on the safety vest, the chances are you're not going to need it, but you know where it is and you know how to put it on, right? It's that kind of thing.
I mean, anyone that survives like a major economic shift, whether it be global, whether it be US based, you talk about the dot-com bomb or the dot-com bust, and you talked a lot about the pandemic, and you talked about many other 2008 crash,
Yeah, 2008 was another
I
one. It
mean,
was
that was another shit storm. I mean, from my perspective, anyone that has got, had a business that's gone through those major economic times, I feel like, you can kind of like take on the world. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
uh,
and I say that, with kindness because it kind of gives you, I suppose, survival mechanisms. But more importantly, it's kind of like what you said, and saying that I picked up from your conversation was that it allowed you to think about worst case scenario
mhm,
and put safety measures in place, right? That's what you're saying. And so
mhm.
if something did happen, then you're far more equipped and you know that the shit's not going to hit the fan as bad as what it would been if you weren't so proactive, right?
Yeah, there's that, but there's also, I'll tell you a little story. So every year I do something that I think is impossible, right? One of the years I did a marathon, I ran a marathon. And there's something that happens when you're training for a marathon where, run for 4 hours. And then the next day you run for 6 hours. And every single time you increase your mileage, you realize that you can take more than you thought you possibly could. So there is some element of just having experienced hardship that makes you stronger in your mind, and therefore you can keep persisting. I think a lot of founders, when stuff gets really, really difficult, if they haven't experienced that kind of difficulty before, they just give up. They think they can't do it, right? But if you just stay in the fight and you just keep going and you keep working through it, your level of grit, your high watermark in your ability to handle anxiety, stress, and less than perfect scenarios becomes stronger, and therefore you can go through stuff. Because I've had, during 2008, I had hundreds of people, and I had to get down to like 7 people right?
Wow.
And that can really depress you, right? And you can be really sitting there going, and you have to rebuild your company. You have all these, and you sometimes you're just like, I'm just going to stop doing all this and go get a job. But if you're used to that, then you're just like, this is par for the course, right? Like
Yeah.
this is just what happens, and I just got to keep persisting.
I picked up something that you said earlier, and you said you'd start up a company, but then you may have started up a second one alongside the other one, or a third one, or whatever it is. First of all, I want to know, why did you do that? Because to me, that's really like you're really stretching yourself. That's the first question. But as part of that, what kind of knock-on effect does that have on your personal life and the relationships that you build around it? Because I mean, I'm a family man. I've got 4 kids, and I'm not sure about yourself, but I I remember that if I stretch myself too thinly, all of those things begin to get affected. How does that affect you?
Oh, it destroyed my personal life when I was doing that. And to give you an idea of what I did, so I started this company. I started an online travel insurance where you could buy travel insurance online.
Got it.
I don't know for sure, but I didn't see any other ones at that time. So then what I did is I had all this traffic buying travel insurance. So then I said, okay, well, they're also going to need passports and visas. So I started a passport and visa company. And then I said, oh, they're also going to need foreign currency exchange. So I started a foreign currency exchange company. And so I had all of these companies that were sort of benefiting from each other, but I kept them separate because I knew that an acquirer wasn't going to buy this variety of things. They were going to be separate acquirers, right?
Got it.
So I did that because of that particular scenario. I had a whole bunch of these different companies going. And in some cases, it had to do with, like, in the affiliate marketing space. When I started, there was no affiliate marketing, right? It was like there were directories of programs that you could go promote, and there was no affiliate network. So I started a directory. I rolled up all the directories, and then I rolled them into one company and sold that company at the cusp of when affiliate network started, because I saw the writing on the wall, and then I went after that. So in that scenario, it was more of me watching the evolution of an industry and then staying ahead of it and selling behind me the things that weren't going to be in the new world, right? um, Through all of these things, yeah, it cost me every relationship I had, every single thing. I mean, it was my whole life was doing startups. I mean, I would work 7 days a week. I would get up at, I still get up at 4 in the morning, and but I don't work until 12 at night now. I mean, there was a time where I had a chair, and next to me I had a bed, so I could just fall over in the bed, take a nap, and sit back up, and then just keep working. I mean, my hygiene wasn't the best either. So
I mean, to me, like, it's kind of like this hustle culture, hustle mentality. Reflecting back on those years, would you still do the same thing? Like, would you still have treated that way? And I mean, how do you feel as an individual? Like, do you feel an element of success? I mean, what was you chasing at the time? Was it that you were like, what was the big dream or desire? What is it that you actually wanted for you to kind of like, work your ass into the ground 7 days a week? Again, I'm curious.
I grew up poor, and we didn't have any money, and I wanted to take care of my family. I wanted to help change the future generations of my family. And I thought that I was the only one that was going to be able to do it. And so I worked really hard, always seeing my siblings and my parents, and seeing if I was able to work hard enough, I could change the future for my whole family. And that was way more motivating than changing my own future. Like my own self. It's interesting. I wasn't motivated by my own desires. I was motivated by my family and being able to change their future. And that's what drove me pretty much the whole time.
Do you feel like you've accomplished that now?
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, all my sibs are great. I bought franchises for them, or bought equipment. One of my brothers is in contracting, so I bought him, tractors and everything, and all of them now are self-sufficient. It changed everybody's life. It was a pretty amazing feeling.
I guess success means different things to different people, right? And I guess we're driven by pain or we're driven by other things that motivate us. It sounds to me as if you were kind of driven by that pain. It's interesting because my background, similar to you, I didn't particularly come from a very wealthy background, but I guess it's also how we associate what success means to us as individuals. But also for me, I don't know about you, back then, but to me, wealth was not money. It was back then, but it isn't now. Wealth is so much more. It's kind of abundance. It's more kind of purpose. Would you agree on that, or what was kind of like back then? What was your ideology of what wealth was?
I think back then, I think wealth was the ability to not have to worry about money. And I mean, worry at a level where you're like, what am I going to eat tonight?
Yeah,
Or am I going to be able to pay my rent or that kind of stuff? Right. But now wealth is more for me. Now, wealth has to do with how I am contributing to this little planet we all share and the things on it. That to me is wealth. Like if I can change the lives of entrepreneurs and make it so they're more successful. And by doing that, those entrepreneurs are creating businesses that are evolving this little rock we all live on. That's wealth to me.
love that. But I thought it was important. I'm fascinated. I mean, you've exited 12. So there's 12 exits in total. What would you say was the single most counterintuitive mindset shift that you ever experienced between the first exit and the 12th exit?
I think about halfway through, I came up with this concept that you have to start with your exit. And I put it in the book and I tell everybody this because when you think about the logic associated with that thesis, it's really, you can't argue it, right? You have to start with the end in mind, because it's not like you can build a business and then right before you're ready to sell it, just start looking for a buyer and say, hey, who wants to buy this business? It doesn't work that way. You have to identify a buyer, make sure that your customer and their customer are the same customer. You have to make sure that your product stack works with them, and you have to track them and see what other things they're buying, to see where in their link, their links of companies that they're trying to chain together is a blank. And then you build a company to fill in that blank, right? And you do that the whole time and you're tracking this, but you have a bunch of different buyers, you typically 3 to 5 different acquirers that you're doing this with. That was a massive mindset shift, because originally when I started, I was like, I would build a business and then I would go out and say, all right, who am I going to sell this to? And I realized after doing that a whole bunch of times that I was like, this is ass backwards. I need to start with who I'm going to sell it to. And that was like a major, major, major thing. It was like, and then after that, I started building companies with purpose, that, knowing that the outcome was going to be an acquisition from these 3 to 5 acquirers. This is what they wanted. And I was building something for, build to order. Right. And that was the huge shift. And I tell everybody, I'm like, if you're building a company without knowing who your acquirers, it's like building a product without knowing who your customer is.
It sounds so simple on paper, Gregory, right? But actually, if you're working in the trenches, sometimes your kind of lack of self-awareness, or people's lack of self-awareness, can really kind of, when you realize like years and years and years, you're like, holy shit, I've been doing this thing. And then you've just made a really good point there, which is create an exit based on what the client or the customer wants, rather than what you assume what they want.
Right, exactly. And what you realize is that when you're building a business, it's just like building a product, right? The acquirers that want to buy your business, they're buying you because they've already got customers. So what they're trying to do is raise the lifetime value of their customers. They're trying to make it so their customers are worth more to them, which means that your product has to match with their customer's persona and ideal customer profile, right? So it's not like you can build a company for 5 years and then see if it fits. You have to build it that way the whole time, right? So once you have that mindset shift and you realize, holy shit, this whole time I've been doing this the hard way, and you start doing it a different way, then the acquisitions just fall into place like magic. And that's when I started to pick up, like I started exiting and exiting and exiting, because I was like, I knew exactly how to build a company to be acquired instead of build a company and try to get it acquired.
What's really interesting about about that because, I mean, the stats are, and you'll know the stats, less than 18% of all business owners exit from their business, right? And less than 48% of them actually have an exit strategy in place anyway. And so the stats are really shocking. And I feel like, I mean, I certainly have probably an idea of why the stats are so low, but what, from your perspective, why do you think the stats are so low? Why do you think that exit seems to be kind of the last thing on people's agendas and not the first thing?
So in my research, I'll tell you what the data says. Okay. In the
Sure.
research I did, because I did 5 years of research on this, thousands of interviews, 210,000 case studies. Like it was a huge 5 people for 5 years. It was a big research project. And what we learned is that the first thing I was hunting for is why were they failing, right? Like why were they? And I realized that the more important thing was when they were failing, because the when, going back to my, line graph with the sticky notes, going back to that tape when I made a bad decision, the when was more critical than it was the why. The why was after the when, right? So I started to learn that, 47.1% of them fail within the first 18 months. And then the rest of them were failing over the following 5 years for decisions they made in the first 18 months. The decisions they made that were bad decisions or problems, they actually grew with the company, but like a cancer, like it's hidden. And they couldn't see it until it was really big, right? And then it would shut them down, right? So a lot of times what I learned is that understanding what you do in the early days is critical for the future, and looking at the decisions you make and think to yourself, what does this look like if this grows? Right? So if your business is growing 20% and you've got a retention problem, that's going to grow 20%. And if you got a margin problem, that's going to grow 20%. And if you got a growth problem, that's going to grow 20%, so on and so forth. And you look at it and say, it may be small now, but it's going to multiply exponentially as your business multiplies exponentially. So, when I looked at things, the number one reason why founders fail is actually bad decisions, which is pretty obvious. But that left me with more questions than anything else. Like, what were the bad decisions and why were they making the bad decisions? It turned out there's a whole iceberg scenario on what were the bad decisions. But what was really important to me is, why were they making the bad decisions? And it turned out they were getting bad advice. So then I said, well, who is giving you the bad advice? Like, where are you getting the bad advice from? And the crazy thing, and this just blew my mind, that it was investors, mentors, program managers, and other founders, the same people that are supposed to be helping them. So then that left me with, what is going on? Like, these are people that benefit when they benefit? Why would they not give them? And it turns out that it wasn't necessarily that it was bad advice. It was bad advice for the stage they were at. So they weren't ready for the advice. It was too early for them to get that advice. And they started acting on it because an investor told them. That was one of the reasons. Another reason is because each one of these people see the business through the lens of their experience. So an investor who's never been a practitioner is looking at all the data from all their portfolio companies and starting to instruct a founder on what to do based on this aggregate of data, of which none of could apply to that particular business at that stage that business is at. And so when I started to put this together, I was like, that's when I came up with the life cycle, the startup life cycle, right? Because I was like, we need to say that this is where you are in the journey of your business. And it can't be when you're raising a certain amount of money. Because a lot of times they'll say, oh, I'm in a pre-seed round, a seed round, a series seed round, an A round. Those are things that happen during the life cycle, but they're not the life cycle itself. So that was why I wrote the book. Cause I was like, if I can just show them the way that the life cycle works, what happens and what they should do and why people are failing during those stages, then I can increase the success rate substantially. So it was fascinating to find that bad advice was ultimately the number one reason why they were failing. And you feel sorry for them because they don't know any better. They don't know good advice from bad advice at that stage, right? First time founder, early stage, I have an idea. They don't know, right? So they're depending on this advice. They get the advice, they act on it, not knowing. And then turns out that advice may have been bad 5 years from now, right? It doesn't need, they may not see that it was bad advice until years later, you know?
Oh, I mean, listen, that's fascinating. I'm quite shocked by those stats, actually. How does one know that they're getting bad advice? They're not going to know. So
Yeah.
then how do you then prevent that from happening? Like, are you saying that, okay, they may take advice from Joe Blogs, who's an investor and whatever it is, they get bad advice, they won't know otherwise. Are you saying that they need to then go out and create like a board of advisors to counteract? How would you do it?
I think that each person that you're getting advice from is, you have to understand to start out with that their advice is coming from their perspective, which means that you have to understand their perspective so that you can understand their advice. And then you can decide whether that advice is applicable for you and your business at that time. So, like, for example, a lot of the startup assistance programs, the accelerators, the incubators, this sort of stuff, they have mentors. Well, maybe the mentor that you have is a really great mentor, but they're a product oriented person. And now they're still your mentor when you're in go to market, but they're not a go to market mentor, right? So you need to make sure that you're talking to the right person for this, going back to the life cycle stage that you're in, right? There's different people that you engage with at different levels of the life cycle because they're experts in that stage of the life cycle. So taking your advice from those people, understanding where their advice is coming from based off their experience and what their expertise is, and the world that they're in, like an investor versus somebody that's a one-time founder. And a lot of the programs, I found that failed startup entrepreneurs were actually mentors for other entrepreneurs. So they were telling them where they failed, but not necessarily where they succeeded, because they hadn't succeeded. In other cases, you had somebody giving advice based on where they succeeded and not where they failed. And in some scenarios, you had people that were really incredible subject matter experts when it comes to go to market, but they understood a high level of go to market, but they didn't have any tactical advice. Like, how do I actually set up HubSpot? You know, how do I write a sequence of emails to go after people? What does direct email even looks like, right? How do I go out and choose keywords and do search and all this kind of stuff? And they end up spending all this money on contractors, right? So it's this kind of stuff that, sometimes they'll have an advisor who used to be some fancy officer at some big corporation, and everybody's all impressed, right? Because, they used to be the VP at XYZ company. Well, that person had a team of people that actually did the work, but they're giving you advice from their perspective. So they're telling the founder, go build a team, but the founder doesn't have any money, or they just raised some money and they burn through the money really quick. And then the investors are like, I'm not funding you again. And the startup is stranded, right? So it's that kind of variety of things that I ran into in the data that was really, it gave me a completely different perspective of what should be the journey of a founder.
It's interesting because you use the word startup quite a lot in our conversation. And what makes me laugh, and I don't know if this is something that has come up in conversation with you, is that I might speak to a founder or a CEO of a XYZ company, and they've started up their business, say, 2 years, and they still say, hey, Adam, I'm XYZ company, I'm a startup. I was like, oh, okay. How long have you been going for? Oh, 18 months to 24 months. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm kind of thinking to myself, well, that's not a startup. Like, do you ever get that? Do you ever find that those conversations happen on a regular basis?
Yeah. I feel like a startup is somebody that is not into deep profitability. When you get into profitability, and you're not a startup anymore, right? A startup is somebody that is still, getting through the grind.
Yep.
But a
Absolutely.
lot of companies will say, oh yeah, they're a startup. It's like 10 years. You're not. You're not
And
a startup anymore.
You know what makes me laugh, right? People that keep using the word that they're in startup, it hurts them so badly in terms of, like, from a raising capital perspective, from a branding perspective, like, it hurts them so bad. And they don't realize it. It harms them. Anyway, I'm digressing. You mentioned earlier on, you did a series of interviews in the book, which took you, about 5 years to gather some of the data as well that you mentioned. And also within the book, you interviewed Navy SEALs and Air Force pilots. Now, tell me, what's the connection with those particular people, and with regards to what you wrote in the book, I'm fascinated to see what you saw in those professions.
Yeah, I did CIA, Navy SEALs, fighter pilots. I did smoke jumpers, fire department smoke jumpers, SWAT teams. And I'll tell you, and I actually did some athletes too. And I'll tell you why I did it. All right. What I was trying to understand is all these people have meticulously planned out strategies for how they're going to tackle a situation. And what I wanted to know is what happens when those plans go wrong and how do you handle it? Right. So if you're looking at a Navy SEAL, I mean, they have their entire, the whole thing is planned out to the T by the second, yet it never goes to plan. Every one of them I interviewed, I was like, how often does it work like the plan? And they're like, it's a miracle if it works like the plan. And I'm like, so how do you handle it when plans don't go the way that they're supposed to go? And they say, we have plans for when plans go wrong. And this is what I was trying to extract, right? I was trying to understand this. And I wanted to also understand how they tackled really difficult situations. I'll give you a story that sort of brings this home. So the smoke jumpers, we have a lot of forest fires, right? You're familiar, you probably see them out there, right? These huge forest fires. The smoke jumpers fly over and jump in the middle of a fire. And I asked them, I'm like, this is a huge issue. You literally have a massive fire. Do you try to put out the fire? Like, what do you do? And they go, no, we don't try to put out the fire. We try to contain the fire. So what we do is we create fire lines. These are like roads that divide the fire up. So if the fire is a square and they have one road, it's 25% contained, and two roads would be 50% contained, right? So the lesson there that I took from that is when I'm in a meeting with a founder and you've been in these conference rooms where people are on their phone, they're on their computer, they're leaving the conference room to go put out fires, right? They're literally, that is the first sign that there's a problem. Instead of trying to put out the fire, contain the fire and then put out the fire. Customer's unhappy, figure out why they're unhappy, fix that, then make the customer happy. Because otherwise, what you could be doing literally is while you're trying to put out the fire, another one's being lit with another customer over here. Pretty soon, you're just chasing problems all the time. And a lot of businesses live that way. They focus on chasing problems instead of finding out the origination of the problem and then solving the problem before they go and try to put out the rest of the problems. Using the solution they came up with to prevent the fires from happening to go heal the problems that they had with their customers.
It does happen, by the way, ladies and gents. Firefighting happens on a daily basis, especially when you're running a business. I can guarantee you that. We know that, don't we, Gregory?
Yeah. It happens, and there's nothing you can do about when it happens, but there is something you can do about how you handle what happens.
Yeah.
Like making sure that it's not going to happen again is more important. So I always have this thing, urgent and important, right?
Yep.
And urgent things happen when important things aren't looked at the first time, right?
Love that.
So if you have an urgent thing happen, you need to realize that you missed something.
I wanted to backtrack a little bit. We talked about it a little bit earlier on, actually. Can you walk us through maybe a moment of brutal honesty that you had with yourself during one of your, say, early failures, if you want to call it that? And how did the internal conversation reshape you in terms of the way that you led your team and the way that you were as a founder?
I think that I always think about the outcome of something instead of, like there's this process to get to the outcome, but then there's the outcome, and it is the direction that I'm going to be the outcome I desire. Right. So I do this. I'm going to give you a sort of an example. I meditate a lot. Right. And I have this meditation where when I'm meditating, I see two tunnels. The first tunnel on the left is my forecasted future, meaning if I keep doing everything I'm doing at the end of this tunnel, when I exit, that's going to be the world that I'm going to be living in. Right. The other tunnel is my manifested tunnel, the one that I want to have happen. And at the end of that tunnel is the world I want to live in. What I'm trying to do is pivot the forecasted tunnel to the desired outcome tunnel, the manifested tunnel that I want to have happen. So when I'm working with employees or whatever, I look at something and I say, if this keeps repeating, is the outcome of this going to be the one that I want? So this was a big change. I had an engineer and a CTO, and these two were friends, and I was getting a lot of problems with the product, right? Just problem after problem. And I kept hearing different reasons / excuses, whatever. And I said, if this keeps repeating, is the outcome going to be the outcome I desire? And it wasn't. So then I ended up having to terminate both of them, which set me backwards in the startup and meant that I had to go explain this to the investors, that I had made this fundamental mistake that cost us, $450,000 payroll. And now I have to go backwards, $450,000, hire new people and move forward, which in a startup is a huge, huge mistake, because you're paying for all of the people in the startup every single month, whether you have a product or not. Right. So it wasn't just the $450,000 cost in payroll for these two people. It was all the other people that were paid for during that same time frame. And that was a moment of like clarity where I was like, I really need to constantly look at these two tunnels with regards to the different functional areas in the business and see if things are going the same way they're going now. Is that going to be the outcome I actually want?
Now, in your book, the startup life cycle, you emphasized a lot about, is it called altruistic capitalism? You talk about that a lot, and so in terms of like having conversations with investors in particular, and you're a big thing. You talked about it earlier around the whole premise of the importance of, purpose is far more important than profitability. You kind of touched about it a little bit at the beginning of the episode. But what, from your perspective, like when you're having those conversations with those skeptical investors and trying to convince them that purpose and profitability aren't just compatible, but they're critical to scaling. What are you saying to those individuals? Like, but when I have conversations with investors, some investors are just, they're only interested in their pockets. They're only interested in how much do you want and when am I going to get my investment back? But they don't see the bigger picture. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, 100%.
How do you convince skeptical investors that purpose is far more important than profitability in order to create scale and move on to an exit?
The way I think about it is very organic, right? Like if you look at nature,
Yeah.
things that don't work with their surroundings eventually die and they get outdated and evolution takes over. So if you're not doing, you can do good while doing well, do well by doing good, right? You can make money and do good at the same time, whether it's for your employees, for your customers, for whoever it is that you're focused on. But I think that if you're not doing that, you're bound to fail, right? Like if your people aren't happy with you, if your customers aren't happy with you, if you don't feel like you're doing something that's fulfilling you and your employees don't feel like you're doing something that's fulfilling them, then ultimately they're not going to be motivated. And motivation is key, right? There's two types of motivation. There's intrinsic motivation. So internal, like this is when you're playing football, right? You're intrinsically motivated to score a goal. And when you're extrinsically motivated, you're motivated by power, money, things like that, right? Image, whatever. Well, one is like drinking coffee. You need another one and another one. It's insatiable. It never works. But intrinsic motivation is ever powerful. So when I'm talking to an investor, I'm like, well, we have one route where we have to keep paying people more and more and more money in order to keep them motivated, and it's just insatiable. We have another route, which is where we have a perspective that we're doing good that makes them feel like it's more rewarding than money. And that makes a company more scalable. So I basically explained to them, that the motivation of employees is what keeps somebody there for the extra 2 hours to make sure things get done. It's the thing that makes people accept less money than they would accept in another job because they feel good about what they're doing. And it's really, really important that people feel good about what they're doing. So to me, when you talk to investors, like this is a good investment. It's a good investment to have an outside perspective that's bigger than you, right? Like a moral frame. So it's like with startup science, for me, we're doing this to help entrepreneurs. Well, why are we doing this to help entrepreneurs? Because entrepreneurs change the world. Evolution is entrepreneurship. It's innovation, right? And so everybody that works for me, they're motivated by the concept of helping us have a better planet, right? That's bigger than money. That's bigger than anything else you could possibly give to them. And that's how I sell investors.
I guess it also depends on the investor themselves. Like you might not actually like them in the first place. So they've got to match your values, right?
Yeah. I mean, I call them coin operated. If an investor is coin operated, then I'm steering clear, because it means the only thing they care about is money. And I just don't want to work with people that, if the only thing they care about is money, I'm not interested, right? If there's a balance, obviously money is always part of it. But if there's a balance between money and other aspects that they also care about, and they're a balanced investor, then I'm like, okay, this is cool, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting because I've probably spoken to hundreds of entrepreneurs and founders. And one of my core questions when I have these conversations is what does your exit strategy look like?
Mm-hmm.
And most people turn around and say, well, I'm not ready to exit.
Yeah, or it's too early or whatever.
Or it's too early. And it kind of surprises me because I think there's this kind of like false perception of what an exit strategy is. Like from my perspective, when we think of exit, we think cash out, retire, sit on a beach in Hawaii with a pina colada. But I guess that all depends on people's assumption of what an exit is. From your perspective, when should someone, like, say we got a business that's been running, we're coming into an age now where baby boomers are coming up for retirement. And so they also control 55 to 60% of the world's wealth. And so quite a hefty chunk of those business owners and founders would have had a well-oiled machine. And some of the conversations I've had is they feel like they're too late. So they're just going to wind their business down, which is a really sad scenario to be in, because they just don't see it. Like, they don't see their business as an asset because they've been grinding for all these years. What advice do you have for those individuals that are maybe, say, 5-7 years away for saying, you know what, I'm ready to go, I'm ready to walk away, or whatever it is? Any advice for those individuals?
Call your competitor. I always tell them, I'm like, what, call your competitor and say, hey, listen, I'm getting ready to retire, and I can't think of anybody better. I've been competing against you for years, and I can't think of anybody better to run my business than you. And, and then work out a deal with your competitor. That's that's exactly what I would do. That would be the first thing I would do. Hey, do you want another location? Or, hey, we've been competing against each other, and I know who I am. I think that talking to your competitor and selling to your competitor in that scenario, I mean, that counts as an exit. I mean, a lot of acquirers are competitors, right? So you already know that you have the same customer. You already know that you have the same business. I mean, why would they not buy you?
That I think that was such a great golden nugget. I think that we kind of overlook that. But what's really interesting, just from conversations that I've also had with regards to exit, is there is also this big fear of, once I've exited from my business, like, what do I do? Like, they're lost, right? They're twiddling their thumbs. I'm sure they've got like a kind of a bucket list of all the things that they want to do, all the impact that they want to create. I don't know whether it be kind of like a mindset shift that needs to happen. Do you find that tends to be quite regular? Did that ever happen to you?
Oh, I've tried to retire multiple times. And like, it'll last like 2 days, because I sort of like say, is this what my life is going to be like from now on? I mean, it's nice to have a vacation. It's nice to have a weekend off, and, but just not doing anything. I think we romanticize the concept of not having anything to do, but it's actually something we need. We need something to do. So what I tell people is, if you're thinking about retiring, just cut yourself down to 4 days a week to begin with, right? And then see how that works out, because maybe what you need is just some more time to do the things you want to do, not all the time to do the things you want to do.
Love that. Some good stuff. So listen, I mean, you must be tired, right? After all of these years, 12 startups, 12 exit, it's pretty tiring, right? I'm fascinated. Like, what does the next 10 to 20 years look like for you? You've accomplished what most people ever dreamed of, 12 exits, let alone one exit. What does legacy mean to you now that you've achieved what you first started out? What does the next chapter look like for you?
I want to drop the failure rate by 20%. That's what I want to do. I want to use the data that I have that helps me understand what's going wrong with startups, and then try to drop the failure rate by 20% using the data. And I mean, there's something to be said for you're walking down the sidewalk and there's a puddle and somebody says, "Hey, there's a puddle, don't step in it." And if you had not known that, you would have stepped in the puddle. If I can point out the puddles to people along their walk and they can avoid those and ultimately get to their office without having their pant legs wet, their trousers all wet on the bottom there, then you actually have there's a level of satisfaction for me as a person that I can't think of anything better, than having made thousands and thousands of entrepreneurs successful, right? Because there's a startup every 10 seconds. So, I mean, there's think about how many that is, right? So dropping the failure rate by 20% would be a substantial shift in economy and jobs, in the evolution and innovation of our planet. I mean, you could make a substantial impact. And ultimately, I'm after, environmental and social impact.
Beautiful. It's wonderful to hear, I suppose the more philanthropist of Gregory Shepherd, because that's kind of what you've kind of moved into, is kind of more impact work, isn't it? And how you've kind of emulated that over the years of crawling through quicksand, if you want to call it that.
You know what I say? I say that building a startup sometimes feels like you're trying to do a marathon through peanut butter.
Yeah, that's so true.
Just running through thick mud. You're just like, this is so hard. When you do an exit, then it's completely, as soon as you do one and your personal financial situation is to a certain point, the rest of them are way easier. So when people talk to me about all these things, I'm like, yeah, but there's a big, big difference between the first two and the rest. It's a huge difference when you get the weight of, your financial livelihood off of your shoulders. It's not even the same. Like, I don't even think it's the same as it was before. So I don't even think it's that great, actually, because the pressure that you have when you're worried about your own financial stability can cause you to make bad decisions.
It's really fascinating about this conversation is about the fact that you have become a little bit like a kind of a mad scientist, but in a way, in a good way, you've identified industries or opportunities where they've really paid off. And did you collect a lot of data along the way before you kind of went into starting up a company? And I suppose you were building businesses for effectively your buyers, which I think is an absolute genius strategy.
I'll tell you the way I think of it. And so if you want to see an opportunity before it happens, this is how I think of it. Imagine that you have a still pond. The water's completely still, and you take a pebble and you throw it in the water, right? And that first drip happens and it bounces up, and then you get that first wake of water that starts to move to the outside. That's a disruption. Okay. The first wake of water that's really close to the original disruption is very dense, high. So if you think about like the iPhone, right? Boom, disruption, right?
Yep.
Well, what's the first wake of things that happen on the outside? The apps. But then as those wakes start to move farther and farther, they become bigger. They're not as thick, but there's more opportunities because the circle is wider, right? So it's not like when there's a disruption, you're too late. You're only too late for that original ring, which most people miss. You have the occasional Facebook, you have the occasional, social media, burst up, and apps that burst up and that sort of stuff. And those people just got lucky, right? They had a tailwind and they just got lucky. But you can still see the writing on the wall for what's going to happen. And that's the expansion phase of an ecosystem. Then ultimately the expansion phase becomes a contraction phase. And that's when roll-ups start to happen. And that's when the acquisitions start to take place. So first, if you think about shopping carts, there used to be thousands of them, right? I mean, everybody had their own shit. This was like, boom, the drip was e-commerce, right? Then you have all of these shopping carts grow and grow and grow. And then you see the contraction. And what do you end up with? 5, 10 out of thousands. If you look at affiliate, everybody had their own original platform for affiliate marketing. And that was the expansion phase. And now you have like 5 affiliate networks, maybe 6 affiliate networks that are the big ones. That's the contraction phase, right? So if you're building a business and you see that disruption, don't look at that initial ring and think, oh, I missed my opportunity. That's your signal that there's going to be opportunities, and start paying attention to what's happening in that ecosystem. And then start to notice when your competitors start to fall off, either go out of business or get acquired. That's your notice that contraction is starting. And then get yourself in that contraction phase, and you'll be pulled in with other people as long as you have that exit strategy planned out in the beginning. When I say strategy, it means plan, right? So exit plan is exit strategy. So you have to have a plan, right? A plan has steps. So you have this plan that you're executing towards. The timing of that plan has to do with when the contraction starts to happen and things start to come back in, right? And then you're like, okay, this industry is about to dry up, right? Like, think about social media. With the exception of TikTok, which just happened to hit, there was a ton of money put into it that helped it become successful. You haven't seen very many social media strategies outside of the original group, right? Anything that came up was acquired or put out of business by the primes. So that's that contraction stage. So if you know that a contraction stage is coming, then you need to sell your business. It's like musical chairs. You know that game, musical chairs? And, the music stops and there's somebody standing because somebody took away a chair. The acquirers are the chairs. So when the acquirers start to buy companies, they're not going to buy 5 of the same company. They're going to buy 1, maybe 2 of the same company, maybe. So if you start to see your acquirers starting to buy companies, you need to get yourself in front of them before you're the one standing there without a chair.
Yes, I think you made a really valid point, because I suppose you kind of answered my question, which was, when do you know when to sell? Like, you talked about the importance of timing. You made the musical chair analogy, which is which I love, but also looking for signals of when to sell. So when your competitors are buying or whatever it might be, you look for what other people in the industry are doing, and when is the right time to jump on that ship, I guess. Would that be a good kind of strategy?
Yeah, watch your competitors, right?
Yeah.
If you start seeing your competitors either going out of business or getting acquired, then it started, right? And you may have 5 years, you may have 3 years. I haven't seen it last more than 5 years. Usually the expansion phase will go on for like 10 years, and the contraction phase will be like at the most 5 years. It happens fast, right? So it happens extremely fast. So if you start to see it happens, it means you need to wake up and like get on top of that like quick, because it's not going to be around very long.
Love that. Love that. Well, listen, I know we could probably talk for ages around exit strategy, exit planning, your book, of course, but I'd love the mission that you're on. I think it's a really great cause. I think there's definitely a need for it, not just in the US, of course. I think there's a massive need for it across the whole globe in a nutshell. Because I'm a big believer. I truly believe that. And it's crazy just from the data that you collected and around the fact that most startups fail because of bad advice. I mean, that blew me away from today's conversation. That really has. And so, listeners, be aware is what I was going to say to you. Be aware and take advice with a pinch of salt, but also do your due diligence and think about, does it apply to you as well? And I think what Gregory really kind of outlined here is, just because you're speaking to an investor, they might be from one particular industry that might not be applicable to your own. So you've got to kind of like take a little bit of advice from maybe one person and maybe take a little bit of advice from another person. It's kind of like, and then you make your own kind of recipe. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, right, Gregory?
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that it's the analogy I use for people all the time is I say, let's say that you're going to ride a bicycle and
Yep.
you go to one person and they say, listen, I've watched 1,000 people ride a bicycle. And then you go to somebody else and they're like, I've been riding a bicycle for a year.
Yep.
Which one are you going to listen to? The one who's never ridden a bicycle but watched people riding bicycles, or the one that's actually ridden a bicycle?
I mean, it's a no-brainer, really, isn't it?
Right.
Come on.
Yeah, so that's a lot of investors, right? They're like, "Oh yeah, I've seen, hundreds of companies."
Yeah.
Well, have you ever run one? You
Exactly.
know? Have
Well,
you
I
ever
won't
done
go
a
into
startup?
the conversation of coaches and consultants that believe one thing and they've never actually run a company in their own lives. So, but that's a
Yeah,
whole new conversation. We won't get
yeah.
into that today. But listen, it's been a great conversation for you guys. I hope that, first of all, I hope that you've got some epiphanies and some gold nuggets. This has been quite an extended conversation. So, what I would highly recommend, rewind this conversation, and if something of interest or something sparked you, depending on when you're listening to this, if it be in the gym or in the car or whatever it is, rewind this back, because I can guarantee you will pick up new material, whether it be when you read a book for the second time, when you watch a movie for the 15th time. I always find that you pick up new material, and it could be like aha moments. It create those aha moments. So that's my bit of advice to you. First of all, Gregory, just want to say thank you so much for being on today. Is there anything that the audience can do for you, because I know you're on this great mission? Love to chime in, get your last words of wisdom.
I think I did something recently that I think might be fun for people.
Okay.
I took all of my articles, my book, and all of the drafts of my book and everything. I put it into an AI that is supposed to emulate me. And you
Boy,
can literally have a conversation with me and ask any questions of anything that I've, like, I don't know, 200 articles, 5,800 pages of writing, put it all in there. And you can go to GregoryShepard.com, click on Ask Anything, and you can just talk to it.
I love it.
And if you don't like it, please tell me. If you think it's great, let me know, right? Because this is like I'm trying to see if I can actually talk to more founders, and make it so I'm more scalable myself. So it's free to
Beautiful.
do. You can just knock yourself out.
Hey, listen, I think that's a lot of fun, guys. Creating your own kind of like AI clone, if you want to call it that.
That's exactly, yeah.
And if you're going through an experience, if you're going through a scenario, if you're going through some challenges, and you're trying to work out or navigate some of those storms out there, all I was going to say to you is, if you don't ask for help, the answer will always be no. Okay. So I just want to point that out to you, but go over to Gregory's website and go say hi to his AI clone and have some fun with it, have some conversations with it. And if you don't get the answers what you want, then guess what? Reach out to him. I'm sure he would love the feedback. Wouldn't you, Gregory?
I would love it. And what I was trying to do is make it so when you read a book,
Yeah.
you have to go back and find the notes, but you understand what you're looking for. So you could go to the AI and you could ask it exactly what you're looking for, and it'll pull it up for you. So you don't have to
Beautiful.
do that anymore. It's free, right? So I was really trying to help.
Very cool. Great free resource, ladies and gents. Just want to say thanks once again, Gregory, for being on today's show. Really greatly appreciate your insights, your stories, and yeah, I think it's been a great conversation. And for you guys that have been listening at home, listen, do me a favor. If this is the first time that you're listening to today's episode, and you're not following or subscribing it to us over on YouTube or on Apple or Spotify, please do me a favor. If there's anything that I could ask from this show, is please head over to those platforms and go follow us. The reason being is because I'd love to receive feedback, love to receive and hear from our fans and our followers and our tribe, because listen, we're on a personal mission ourselves. So I would love to hear from you guys. Anything. I hope you've enjoyed today's show. And from me and Gregory, thanks so much. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.